The ancient walls of Jerusalem cast long shadows as Prophet Zakariyā performed his final prayer in the sacred sanctuary. For decades, he had been the spiritual guardian of Maryam and a beacon of unwavering faith among his people. But powerful forces had grown weary of his teachings, his calls for spiritual renewal that threatened their carefully constructed authority. As dawn broke on what would become his final day, divine revelation came to him one last time, a message that would seal both his fate and his eternal place in sacred history. The prophet's weathered hands trembled, not with fear, but with anticipation of what was to come. What divine purpose could be served by the brutal end that awaited this beloved servant of God? The mihrab stood silent, its intricate carvings worn smooth by the touch of generations. It was here, in this sacred prayer niche, where Zakariyā had received divine messages throughout his life. His weathered fingers traced the patterns carved into the ancient wood, a ritual performed thousands of times over decades of devotion. Born to a family of modest means in the outskirts of Jerusalem, Zakariyā had shown signs of exceptional piety from early childhood. While other children played in the dusty streets, young Zakariyā could often be found sitting with the elders, absorbing their wisdom with a focus unusual for his age. His father, a carpenter with little formal education but deep faith, recognized something special in his son's attentiveness to matters of the spirit. "He listens as if God himself is speaking," his father once remarked to a neighbor, "even when it is just an old man rambling about the ancient ways." By his 20th year, Zakariyā had memorized the sacred texts and gained a reputation as a thoughtful interpreter of divine law. Unlike some scholars who wielded knowledge as a weapon of authority, Zakariyā approached the texts with humility, often prefacing his insights with, "I understand it thus." But God knows best. This approach endeared him to the common people while earning cautious respect from the temple authorities. The aging high priest Eleazar took special interest in the young man, mentoring him despite whispers from other priests who viewed Zakariyā's growing popularity with suspicion. "He reminds me of what we all should be," Eleazar told his concerned colleagues. "A vessel for divine guidance rather than a guardian of our privileges." In the political landscape of Jerusalem, balanced precariously between Roman occupation and religious autonomy, Zakariyā navigated with remarkable wisdom. He fulfilled the requirements of civil authority while maintaining the spiritual integrity demanded by his faith. When Roman officials attended temple ceremonies, he showed appropriate respect without the excessive deference that would have compromised his standing among the devout. Marriage came later for Zakariyā than for most men of his time. At 30, he wed Elizabeth, a woman from a prestigious priestly family. The match raised his status among the religious hierarchy, but brought unexpected sorrow as years passed without children. In a culture where offspring represented divine blessing and continuation of legacy, their childlessness became a quiet burden they carried together. "Perhaps God has other plans for us," Zakariyā would comfort his wife. Though his private prayers often included heartfelt pleas for a child, his daily rituals never wavered despite personal disappointment. Before dawn, he would rise for prayer, his voice a gentle murmur in the darkness. Midday would find him teaching in the temple courtyards, surrounded by students ranging from humble shepherds to wealthy merchants. Evenings were devoted to deeper study and counsel for those facing difficult decisions. As Zakariyā's influence grew, so did opposition from a faction within the temple leadership. Chief among his critics was Dathan, a priest whose family had held power for generations through careful political maneuvering. "He undermines tradition with his interpretations," Dathan warned the council. "Today, he suggests the spirit of the law matters more than its letter. Tomorrow, what will remain of our authority?" Despite such opposition, Zakariyā continued his work, uncompromising in matters of principle, yet gentle in his approach. When a young woman was brought before him, Accused of a serious moral transgression, he questioned the witnesses so thoroughly that they eventually withdrew their claims, recognizing their testimony was built on rumor rather than truth. "Justice requires more than zealous enforcement," he told the gathering afterward. "It demands we search our own hearts as carefully as we judge others." This incident marked the beginning of a more organized resistance to his growing influence. Temple guards began monitoring his teachings more closely. Opportunities to lead prayers became less frequent, yet the people's devotion to him only increased, creating a delicate tension that would define the coming decades of his life. Each evening, Zakariyā would return to the mihrab, his special place of communion with the divine, seeking guidance for the challenges that lay ahead. It was here, in the soft glow of oil lamps, that his purpose was continually renewed, his resolve strengthened for whatever God's plan might require of him. The bronze key felt unusually heavy in Zakariyā's palm as he stood before the chamber door. Intricate symbols adorned its handle, marking it as no ordinary key, but one that symbolized a sacred trust. This small object represented his divinely appointed responsibility as guardian to a most extraordinary child. The selection had come unexpectedly. When Hannah, wife of Imran and among the most respected women in Jerusalem, had dedicated her unborn child to temple service, no one anticipated the challenges this would present. After Imran's death before the child's birth, and Hannah's passing shortly after delivering a girl, a daughter named Maryam, the temple priests faced an unprecedented situation. A female child cannot serve in the inner sanctum, argued Dathan during the council meeting. It defies all tradition. Yet the vow was made to God and cannot be broken, countered Zakariyā. We must find a way to honor both the vow and our traditions. The debate raged for days until Zakariyā proposed a solution, the construction of a special chamber within the temple grounds where the girl could be raised in piety, educated in sacred matters, yet separate from the male-dominated temple activities. What he didn't reveal was the dream that had come to him 3 nights in succession, showing him caring for this child as if she were his own. When the question of guardianship arose, several priests cast lots to determine who would take responsibility for the orphaned girl. Against all odds, and much to Dathan's visible displeasure, the lot fell to Zakariyā each time it was cast, until even the most skeptical recognized divine intervention. "It seems God has chosen you for this task," the high priest finally acknowledged, and so began Zakariyā's role as guardian to young Maryam. Each morning, he would use the bronze key to unlock her chamber, bringing fresh provisions and materials for her education. The child's exceptional nature became apparent almost immediately. At an age when most children struggled with basic teachings, Maryam showed understanding that astonished her guardian. "How do you comprehend these matters so thoroughly?" he once asked after she offered insights into a complex passage of scripture. "The words speak to my heart," she answered simply, as if they were written there before I ever read them. As the years passed, Zakariyā developed a deep paternal affection for his ward. Though childless in his marriage, he found in Maryam a daughter of spirit, if not of blood. Their daily discussions of sacred texts became a highlight of his duties, her questions often leading him to deeper understanding of passages he had studied his entire life. The first miracle came when Maryam was 12. Entering her chamber one winter morning, Zakariyā found fresh summer fruits arranged on her table, figs, grapes, and pomegranates out of season and impossible to obtain. "Child, where did these come from?" he asked, amazed. "They are from God," she replied with serene certainty. "He provides for whom he wills, without measure." This incident marked the beginning of many such occurrences. Zakariyā would often find unseasonable provisions in Maryam's chamber, flowers blooming in winter, cooling fruits in summer heat. Sometimes rare manuscripts she needed for her studies appearing without explanation. These miracles did not go unnoticed. Temple attendants whispered among themselves, and eventually reports reached Dathan and his allies. "There is something unnatural about the girl," Dathan suggested during a private council meeting. "Perhaps even sorcery. She is among the most devout souls I have ever known," Zakariyā defended firmly. "These blessings come from God alone." The scrutiny intensified as Maryam approached womanhood. Requests from Dathan's faction to interview her became more frequent, more insistent. Zakariyā found himself increasingly acting as a shield between his ward and those who viewed her with suspicion or, worse, saw her as a means to undermine his position. "They fear what they cannot control," he explained, gently when Maryam questioned the growing restrictions on her movements within the temple grounds. "And do you fear for me?" she asked, her eyes showing wisdom beyond her years. "I fear only that I might fail in the trust God has placed in me," Zakariyā answered honestly. "But I believe with complete certainty that you walk a path designed by divine wisdom, though where it leads I cannot see." Each evening, after securing her chamber with the bronze key, Zakariyā would offer special prayers for guidance in his sacred duty. The connection between guardian and ward had grown into something profound, a spiritual lineage that transcended blood relations, preparing them both for extraordinary trials to come. The wooden cradle stood empty in the corner of the room, its hand-carved details catching the morning light. Zakariyā had crafted it himself, each cut and curve an act of faith despite his advanced age and the seeming impossibility of its purpose. For decades, this cradle had existed only in his prayers, a vessel for hopes long deferred. Morning prayers had become a time of particular poignancy for Zakariyā as he entered his 80th year. The chamber where he knelt felt especially silent on this day as he addressed his Lord with a vulnerability he rarely showed publicly. "My Lord," he whispered, forehead pressed against the cool stone floor. "My bones have grown feeble, and my head has flared with white hair. Never have I been disappointed in my prayers to you. I fear for my relatives after I am gone, and my wife is barren. Grant me from yourself an heir, who will inherit from me and the family of Jacob, and make him, my Lord, pleasing to you." The prayer held decades of longing. Though Zakariyā found profound joy in his guardianship of Maryam and his service to the temple, the absence of a child from his own lineage remained a quiet sorrow. Each time he witnessed the miracle of unseasonable fruits in Maryam's chamber, a question formed in his heart. If God could provide this, might he also make the impossible possible in other ways? The answer came not as a whisper, but as a presence that filled the chamber with light so intense Zakariyā raised his hands to. "Shield his eyes, O Zakariyā," came a voice that seemed to emanate from everywhere and nowhere. "We give you good tidings of a son whose name will be Yahya. We have not given this name to anyone before." Zakariyā trembled, caught between joy and disbelief. "My Lord, how can I have a son when my wife is barren and I have reached extreme old age?" "So it will be," the voice replied. "Your Lord says, 'It is easy for me, I created you before, when you were nothing.' My Lord, give me a sign," Zakariyā requested, his voice barely audible. "Your sign is that you will not speak to people for 3 nights." Though being in sound health, when the light receded, Zakariyā found himself unable to form words. His mouth moved, but no sound emerged. When he left the chamber and encountered temple attendants, he could communicate only through gestures. Writing in the dust with his finger to explain his condition was temporary and divinely ordained. For 3 days and nights, Zakariyā lived in sacred silence. In this quiet space, doubt and wonder battled within him. When he returned home and approached his elderly wife, Elizabeth, her face registered immediate concern at his unusual muteness. He took her hands in his and placed them over her womb, his eyes conveying what his voice could not. Understanding dawned slowly on her face, followed by disbelief, then cautious hope. She had long ago accepted their childlessness as God's will. Now, tears streamed down her weathered cheeks as Zakariyā scratched words in a tablet of clay. "We will have a son named Yahya." The pregnancy that followed was considered miraculous throughout Jerusalem. Elizabeth, well past childbearing years, carried herself with quiet dignity despite the whispers and stares. Some claimed sorcery, others suggested deception. Zakariyā, his voice restored after the promised 3 nights, responded to all doubts with serene certainty. He who created the heavens and earth from nothing can surely create life from what seems barren, he would say. All things are possible with divine permission. The birth itself was remarkably easy for a woman of Elizabeth's age. As dawn broke after a short labor, the newborn's first cries filled their modest home. Zakariyā held his son with trembling hands, marveling at the perfection of tiny fingers and the intensity of eyes that seemed to hold ancient wisdom. "His name is Yahya," Zakariyā announced to the relatives gathered for the naming ceremony, forestalling their suggestions of family names. "This is what God has commanded." From his earliest days, Yahya showed signs of extraordinary spiritual awareness. Where other infants cried without clear cause, Yahya seemed to do so only at moments when prayers were being neglected. While children his age babbled nonsense, Yahya's first words were remarkably coherent, often echoing phrases from sacred texts he had never been taught. By age 5, he could recite passages that scholars spent decades mastering. By 7, he offered interpretations that caused learned men to exchange astonished glances. Zakariyā would watch his son with quiet pride, the wooden cradle now stored away, but its significance never forgotten, a testament to faith rewarded and divine promises fulfilled. The worn scrolls lay open on the table, illuminated by oil lamps as evening settled over Jerusalem. Zakariyā's careful handwriting covered the parchment, preserving interpretations that increasingly challenged the religious establishment. His fingers, now gnarled with age, traced the lines he had written decades earlier, finding in them the seeds of the controversy that now enveloped him. The law was given not as a burden, but as a mercy, he had written. When we make it heavier than God intended, we replace divine wisdom with human rigidity. Such teachings had earned him devoted followers and dangerous enemies. While the common people embraced his emphasis on compassion over strict legalism, temple authorities viewed his interpretations as threats to their carefully constructed power. In the courtyard outside the temple, crowds gathered daily to hear Zakariyā speak. Despite his advanced age, his voice carried clearly across the space. His words simple yet profound. "The rituals of worship are meaningless if they do not transform the heart," he told the assembled listeners. "God looks not at your outward observances, but at your inward devotion." A prayer offered with sincerity in a humble home pleases him more than elaborate ceremonies performed without true submission. Among those listening was Haman, recently appointed to the temple council through political connections rather than spiritual merit. His narrow eyes narrowed further as he made mental notes of statements that could be construed as undermining temple authority. He speaks of sincere prayer in humble homes. Haman later reported to fellow council members, "What need then for the temple? What need for our guidance? Follow this path, and soon the people will abandon both." The controversy intensified when Zakariyā began teaching from his scrolls about signs of a coming prophet who would transform religious understanding. Though careful never to claim this role for himself, his detailed descriptions based on ancient texts suggested intimate knowledge that unnerved the authorities. The coming one will confirm what came before, while opening new paths to divine truth, he explained to a smaller group of dedicated followers. He will face great opposition from those who cling to power rather than righteousness. Word of these teachings reached Haman quickly through his network of informants. That evening he convened an emergency meeting with like-minded council members. "This goes beyond mere interpretation," Haman declared. "He speaks of a new prophet who will undermine our traditions. Some already whisper that he refers to his own son, Yahya. Others claim he prepares the way for the child Maryam will bear, though she remains unwed. We cannot allow such dangerous prophecies to continue unchallenged. The council drafted a formal warning delivered to Zakariyā the following morning as he prepared for prayer. The document, bearing official seals, demanded he retract specific teachings and confine himself to approved interpretations. Zakariyā read it slowly, then set it aside without comment. When he emerged to teach that day, his message remained unchanged. Truth cannot be confined by human restrictions, he told the gathered crowd, many of whom had heard about the warning. When divine light shines, those who profit from darkness will always seek to extinguish it. But a flame lit by God cannot be quenched by human breath. That afternoon, as Zakariyā returned from teaching, a stone struck the wall beside him. Though it missed its mark, the message was clear. Temple guards nearby made no move to identify the assailant, their inaction speaking volumes. That night, Yahya, now a young man with his own growing reputation for spiritual insight, expressed concern for his father's safety. "They will not stop at threats, Father," he warned. "I have heard whispers of darker plans." "All is proceeding as it must," Zakariyā replied, with surprising serenity. "The path of truth has never been without danger." He returned to his scrolls, adding new reflections by lamplight. These writings, he knew, might outlast him. Each word was chosen with care, not just for present readers, but for generations yet unborn, who might someday seek wisdom from his experiences. "The greatest test of faith," he wrote, "is not maintaining belief in times of blessing, but holding fast to divine truth when that very commitment invites persecution. In such moments, remember that prophets before you walked this same difficult path. Their footsteps remain visible to those with eyes to see, offering guidance when the way seems darkest." As he finished writing, a sudden breeze caused the lamp to flicker, casting momentary shadows across the ancient words that had guided his life and would soon light the way toward his destiny. The Roman decree, sealed with the imperial insignia, lay unfolded on the council table. Its parchment was fine, its Latin script elegant, but its contents cast a shadow over the room. What appeared on its surface to be a guarantee of religious freedoms contained subtle restrictions that troubled Zakariyā deeply. "The empire grants continued autonomy in religious practices," read the high priest, "provided such practices do not contradict Roman law or incite unrest among the population." Who determines what constitutes inciting unrest? Zakariyā asked, his voice measured but firm. Words of truth often disturb those comfortable with falsehood. The Roman governor's representative, a thin man named Marcus Severus, smiled without warmth. "The determination rests with those appointed by Rome to maintain order. I trust this will not be problematic for men of wisdom, such as yourselves." The implied threat hung in the air. Jerusalem existed in a precarious balance, allowed religious autonomy only insofar as it served Roman interests in maintaining a peaceful province. The temple authorities had long ago reached an understanding with their occupiers. They would ensure compliance among their people in exchange for retaining their positions of privilege. "We appreciate Rome's continued respect for our ancient traditions," the high priest responded, carefully avoiding Zakariyā's gaze. After the meeting, Zakariyā walked slowly through the marketplace, observing the Roman soldiers patrolling in pairs, their presence a constant reminder of foreign rule. A decade earlier, a failed rebellion had led to brutal crackdowns. The memory of crucified rebels lining the roads into Jerusalem remained vivid for many. "Teacher," a voice whispered from a shadowed doorway. Zakariyā paused, recognizing Ezra, a junior temple guard who had shown sympathy toward his teachings. "Walk with me to purchase bread," Zakariyā suggested calmly, understanding the need for discretion. As they moved through the crowded market, Ezra spoke quietly. "Haman met privately with the Roman commander yesterday. I was assigned to guard the entrance, but could hear portions of their conversation. And what did you hear that troubles you so?" "They discussed ways to limit your teaching without creating a martyr." Haman suggested that rather than direct action against you, they should target your followers, particularly those who record and distribute your words. Zakariyā nodded slowly, absorbing this information. And what was the Roman's response? He said Rome cares little for religious squabbles unless they threaten tax collection or public order. But he agreed that preventing the spread of potentially inflammatory ideas serves both their interests. That evening, Zakariyā called together his most trusted followers in a supporter's home well away from the temple. Windows were covered, voices kept low. The small room was crowded with people ranging from poor laborers to a few wealthy merchants who had embraced his teachings. The path ahead grows more difficult, Zakariyā told them. Both temple authorities and Roman officials now view our community with suspicion. We must be wise as serpents, gentle as doves, should we meet less frequently. Asked a stonemason whose livelihood depended on temple contracts. On the contrary, Zakariyā replied, we must strengthen our bonds while becoming more careful in our methods. Smaller gatherings in rotating locations. Teachings memorized rather than written when possible. And above all, exemplary conduct that gives our enemies no legitimate cause for complaint. The meeting continued late into the night, practical arrangements intermingled with spiritual instruction. As dawn approached, one of the wealthy merchants approached Zakariyā privately. I fear there is a traitor among us, he whispered. Certain details of our previous gathering were repeated to me by a temple associate, information only someone present could have known. The news saddened, but did not surprise Zakariyā. Keep your observation between us for now. Watch and listen, but make no accusations. The truly faithful will reveal themselves through their actions in difficult times. As Zakariyā returned home in the early morning light, he noticed a figure following at a distance. Instead of confronting his shadow, he continued calmly to his door, then turned and offered a blessing gesture toward his unseen watcher. The figure retreated hastily into a side alley. Inside his modest home, Zakariyā found Yahya already awake in prayer. His son looked up, immediately sensing his father's burden. The net draws tighter, Zakariyā confirmed, sinking wearily onto a bench. Both temple and Rome now align against us. Yahya's eyes, always disconcertingly perceptive, studied his father's face. You've long prepared for this moment. Yes, Zakariyā acknowledged, though preparation makes the cup no less bitter. He sighed deeply, then straightened his shoulders. But divine purpose often reveals itself most clearly when human opposition is strongest. We will continue on the path set before us, regardless of who stands against us. Morning light filtered through the simple window, illuminating the determination on both their faces. Father and son, united in purpose, despite the gathering storm. The copper bowl gleamed in the lamplight, its surface reflecting Zakariyā's weathered face as he gazed into the water it contained. This simple vessel had become a focal point for his deepening visions, a window through which divine revelations poured with increasing frequency and clarity. He had first used the bowl decades ago, a traditional tool for focused meditation. Over time, what began as reflective prayer transformed into something more profound. The still water would sometimes ripple without cause, and in its surface, Zakariyā would see not his own reflection, but scenes from times yet to come. Tonight, as Jerusalem slept, Zakariyā kept vigil. Recent visions had grown more urgent, more specific. Dipping his fingers into the cool water, he whispered ancient prayers passed down through generations of prophets. The surface stilled unnaturally, becoming like polished glass, then began to glow with an inner light. In its depths, Zakariyā saw his son Yahya, older, standing in the Jordan River, water swirling around his waist. A line of people stretched along the bank, waiting to be immersed by his hands. Yahya's voice carried across the water, "Prepare the way! The promised one comes after me!" The scene shifted. Yahya now stood before a palace, his simple garments stark against the luxury surrounding him. His finger pointed accusingly at a ruler whose face remained shadowed. "It is not lawful," Yahya declared, his voice unwavering. Guards moved to seize him, their faces twisted with anger. Zakariyā's hands trembled. The water rippled, and the vision changed again. Now he saw Maryam, the girl he had protected and nurtured, grown to womanhood. She sat alone beneath a palm tree, her face showing both wonder and apprehension. A presence approached her, not a human form, but a shimmer of light taking shape. Words floated across the water's surface. "We shall grant you a pure son." The vision expanded, revealing Maryam cradling an infant while a storm of controversy swirled around her. Accusers pointed fingers. Defenders stood firm. The child's face radiated a serene wisdom impossible for one so young. As Zakariyā watched, the infant grew before his eyes into a young man who walked among the sick, touching them with healing hands. The crowds around him swelled. Some faces showed adoration, others displayed hatred. The young man spoke, and though Zakariyā could not hear the words, their impact was visible as listeners either fell to their knees in acceptance or turned away in rejection. "Isa," Zakariyā whispered, the name coming to him unbidden. "Son of Maryam." The water darkened. Clouds gathered in its depths. Isa stood now before hostile crowds, his hands bound. The scene was too painful to witness, yet Zakariyā could not look away. But before the darkest moment came, the vision shifted again. A blinding light, an empty tomb, ascension. Exhausted, Zakariyā pulled his hand from the water. The visions faded, but their weight remained, settling on his shoulders like a heavy mantle. The interconnected destinies of Yahya and Isa, of his son and Maryam's child, were becoming clear, as was the price they would pay for their divine missions. The following morning, Zakariyā summoned his 3 most trusted disciples. These men had proven their loyalty through years of persecution, their faith unshaken by growing dangers. In his inner chamber, doors secured, he shared selected visions. "My son Yahya will herald the coming of a greater prophet," he told them, his voice low but firm. "This prophet will be born to Maryam, whom I have guarded since childhood. His coming will divide our people, but fulfill ancient promises." "When will this happen?" asked the eldest disciple. "Some events have already been set in motion," Zakariyā replied. "Others await their appointed time. But I have seen that neither Yahya nor I will live to witness the culmination of God's plan through Isa." The disciples exchanged troubled glances. "You have seen your own end?" One ventured. Zakariyā nodded slowly. "Not its manner or moment, but I have seen enough to know my remaining time grows short, which is why I must entrust certain knowledge to you, teachings too dangerous to commit to writing, preparations that must be made in secret, through the day and into the night." Zakariyā outlined spiritual succession plans, hiding places for sacred texts, and signs by which his followers would recognize true spiritual authority in chaotic times to come. He designated protectors for both Yahya and Maryam, knowing each would face unique dangers. "Above all," he concluded as dawn approached, "remember that what appears as defeat in worldly terms may be victory in divine reality. The path of prophecy often leads through suffering toward ultimate vindication." Later, alone again with the copper bowl, Zakariyā sought confirmation that he had shared enough, but not too much. The water's surface remained still this time, reflecting only his face, lined with age and bearing the peaceful certainty of one who had glimpsed divine purpose and accepted his role within it. Whatever the personal cost might be, the sealed message arrived at dawn, delivered by a breathless child who vanished into the awakening streets before questions could be asked. The parchment bore no external markings, but was sealed with wax, impressed with a symbol Zakariyā recognized, a crescent moon and star used by a former student who had become an advisor in the palace. Breaking the seal carefully, Zakariyā unrolled the message, his eyes quickly scanning the hurried script. "Most respected teacher, the council met in secret last night with Roman officials present. Your arrest has been ordered for the crime of blasphemy and inciting unrest. The soldiers come at midday. This is no empty threat. I heard the order given and saw the document signed. There is still time to flee. A boat waits at Jaffa that can take you to Alexandria, where many respect your teachings. I have arranged everything. This is your only chance." The message was unsigned, but Zakariyā had no doubt of its authenticity or urgency. He closed his eyes briefly, not in fear, but in quiet acknowledgement that the moment long anticipated had finally arrived. Instead of packing or making hasty preparations for escape, Zakariyā calmly performed his morning prayers. Then he burned the warning message, watching as the parchment curled and blackened, its ashes carried away by a gentle breeze through the open window. By mid-morning, Zakariyā had summoned his closest disciples one by one, using different messengers and staggered timing to avoid drawing attention. Each arrived separately to his modest home, confusion giving way to alarm as they realized the nature of this unusual gathering. "The temple authorities move against me today," Zakariyā explained without preamble once the small group had assembled. "By sunset, I will be in their custody." "Then we must hide you," insisted Bartholomew, a former merchant whose wealth had often supported their community. "I have property in the hills where—" Zakariyā raised his hand, silencing the well-intentioned offers that began to flow. "My path does not lead to escape, but through what comes. I have known this day would arrive since before most of you joined our circle. You cannot simply surrender," protested another, his young face flushed with emotion. "The people need your guidance, your wisdom, and they shall have it," Zakariyā replied calmly, "though perhaps not in the form they expect." From beneath his simple bed, he withdrew a cedar box inlaid with mother-of-pearl. Opening it revealed several scrolls, carefully wrapped in linen. These contained teachings not yet revealed publicly, insights for times to come, when I am no longer among you. Each of you will take one and memorize its contents before passing it to the next trustworthy bearer. One by one, he distributed the scrolls, giving specific instructions to each disciple about who should receive them next and under what circumstances. "What of your son?" asked the eldest disciple, accepting his scroll with trembling hands. "Will they move against Yahya as well?" "Yahya walks his own prophetic path," Zakariyā answered. "I have already spoken with him. He leaves Jerusalem today for the wilderness near the Jordan, where he will begin his public ministry when the appointed time comes." The farewell to Yahya earlier that morning had been brief but profound. No tears were shed, though both men understood it was their final meeting in this world. Zakariyā had placed his hands on his son's head in blessing, then pressed a small leather pouch into his hands. "Your mother's prayer beads," he had explained. "And this," he removed the signet ring from his finger, "which marks you as my true successor, not in temple authority, but in spiritual lineage." Now, as midday approached, Zakariyā gave final instructions to his disciples. "Scatter after leaving here. Tell no one we met. When news of my arrest spreads, express appropriate concern, but do nothing to suggest special knowledge. The time for open resistance has not yet come. And if the youngest disciple couldn't finish the question. "If my journey ends in martyrdom," Zakariyā said gently, "remember that prophets before me have walked this path. Death cannot silence truth. It only plants it deeper." As his disciples departed one by one, Zakariyā entrusted special religious artifacts to each, items too sacred to risk confiscation. His prayer rug to one, ancient commentaries to another, ritual implements to a third. By the time the last disciple left, his home stood nearly bare of meaningful possessions. Alone now, Zakariyā moved to the window. The sun had reached its zenith. In the distance, he could see dust rising from the road leading to his home, the approaching guards right on schedule. Rather than fear, a profound peace settled over him, the serenity of one who had long ago surrendered to divine will, and now faced its unfolding with the calm acceptance of a faithful servant. The cedar pulpit stood in the eastern courtyard of the temple, worn smooth by generations of teachers who had addressed the faithful from its modest height. Unlike the ornate platform inside used by the high priest on special occasions, this simple structure was where everyday instruction happened, where ordinary people gathered to hear the word of God interpreted for their lives. Zakariyā approached it with measured steps, fully aware of the significance of what would be his final public teaching. The warning of imminent arrest had not deterred him. Rather, it had crystallized his resolve to speak truth openly one last time. Word had spread quickly through Jerusalem that the beloved elder teacher would be speaking. By mid-morning, an unprecedented crowd had gathered, laborers pausing their work, merchants leaving their stalls, women with children balanced on hips, even a few Roman soldiers lingering at the edges, ostensibly to maintain order, but clearly interested in what had drawn such numbers. From his vantage point, Zakariyā noticed temple scribes positioned strategically throughout the audience, tablets ready to record his words, not to preserve them, but to find grounds for condemnation. Haman stood in the shadow of a column, his face twisted in a poorly concealed mixture of anticipation and contempt. None of this troubled the aged prophet as he climbed the 3 steps to the pulpit. His eyes, still clear despite his many years, surveyed the assembled crowd with compassion. When he finally spoke, his voice carried with surprising strength across the hushed courtyard. Children of Abraham, seekers of divine truth, I stand before you today, as I have many times, but with an awareness that seasons change, and what is planted must in time yield to harvest. The crowd leaned forward, sensing something momentous in his tone. For decades, I have sought to strip away human additions that obscure divine intent. Today, I speak with particular urgency about recognizing truth when it appears in unexpected forms. He paused, his gaze sweeping across the diverse faces before him. Soon, very soon, a voice will cry out from the wilderness, a voice calling not for more elaborate rituals, but for sincere repentance. When you hear this voice, recognize it as the fulfillment of ancient promises. Murmurs rippled through the crowd. Some glanced at each other in confusion. Others nodded in understanding, connecting his words to previous teachings about his son. After this voice, one will come whose sandal I am not worthy to untie. He will not arrive with worldly power or political authority. The religiously influential may reject him. The powerful may oppose him. But those who have cultivated inner sight will recognize divine light when it shines. The scribes were writing furiously now, recognizing prophetic claims that could be construed as undermining established authority. Zakariyā noticed but continued without hesitation. This one will fulfill the law, not by rigid enforcement of its letter, but by embodying its spirit. He will demonstrate that mercy transcends sacrifice, that genuine worship happens in hearts rather than merely in temples made by human hands. Gasps arose from the temple officials present. Such words bordered on blasphemy by their narrow definition. Yet the common people listened with rapt attention, many with tears streaming down weathered faces. When persecution comes, and it will come to those who embrace this renewed path, remember that prophets before you suffered similarly. Take comfort, not in worldly vindication, but in the knowledge that you walk in divine truth. An elderly woman near the front began to weep openly. Others reached out to touch the hem of Zakariyā's simple robe as he descended from the pulpit to move among them. For nearly an hour, he continued teaching while moving through the crowd, offering personal blessings, answering questions, speaking words of specific guidance to individuals, as if he knew their particular circumstances, which many believed he did through divine insight. To a young pregnant woman, he whispered, "Name him John, and raise him to recognize divine signs." To a merchant known for questionable business practices, he said firmly but kindly, "There is still time to make restitution." To a Roman soldier who had edged closer, drawn by something he couldn't name, Zakariyā said, "Your questions about purpose will find answers if you remain open to truth from unexpected sources." Throughout this intimate teaching, Zakariyā wove coded messages understood only by his initiated followers, references to meeting places, recognition signals, chains of trusted succession. Though his physical presence among them would end, the community would continue, preserving essential teachings until the time was right for their full revelation. The teaching might have continued longer, but a commotion at the courtyard entrance signaled the arrival of a temple guard contingent, their captain bearing an official scroll. Seeing them, Zakariyā offered one final blessing to those nearest him, then stood tall, his face composed as the guards approached with purpose in their stride. The wooden staff splintered with a sharp crack that echoed through the suddenly silent temple courtyard. For decades, this simple rod of olive wood had supported Zakariyā through countless journeys, a constant companion now broken in the hands of the temple guard captain. By authority of the high priest and the temple council, "You are commanded to cease this unauthorized assembly," the captain announced, deliberately stepping on the broken pieces of the staff as he unrolled an official proclamation. Zakariyā stood perfectly still, his aged face serene despite the deliberate provocation. The crowd, however, surged with indignation. Angry murmurs rippled outward from where the staff lay broken. How dare they interrupt the teacher? What authority breaks a holy man's staff? Since when do we need permission to hear God's word? Sensing the potential for unrest, Zakariyā raised his hands, palms outward in a calming gesture. "Peace, friends. Let us hear what the council demands." Haman stepped forward from behind the guards, his expensive robes marking his elevated status. His thin lips curled into what might have been mistaken for a smile, but contained no warmth. "Zakariyā ben Barakya," he began formally, "you stand accused of spreading false teachings contrary to established interpretation, undermining proper religious authority, and inciting unrest among the people. The council requires your immediate presence to answer these charges." "I have taught nothing in secret," Zakariyā replied, his voice carrying clearly across the courtyard. "For 40 years I have spoken openly in this very temple. If my teachings are false, specify the falsehood." The simple challenge visibly irritated Haman. He had expected immediate compliance, not a public debate that would force him to engage with Zakariyā's actual teachings, many of which were difficult to attack directly, without appearing to oppose widely accepted spiritual principles. "Your recent statements regarding a coming prophet who will change established practices constitute a clear assault on the sacred traditions preserved by the council," Haman countered. "Furthermore, your suggestion that true worship occurs outside the temple diminishes the sanctity of this holy place." An elderly man near the front of the crowd called out, "He quotes the prophet Isaiah. Will you arrest our ancient prophets as well?" Scattered laughter rippled through the assembly, further enraging Haman. "The council alone holds authority to interpret prophetic writings," he snapped. "Not self-appointed teachers who attract followers through appeals to emotion rather than proper understanding." Zakariyā's response came with quiet dignity. True authority comes not from position, but from fidelity to divine truth. When religious leaders place human tradition above divine intent, they forfeit moral authority regardless of their titles. The crowd's murmurs of approval were cut short when one of the temple guards struck Zakariyā across the face with an open palm. The unexpected blow caused the elderly prophet to stagger but not fall. A thin line of blood appeared at the corner of his mouth. "You dare speak of moral authority while blaspheming against the very institution established by Moses himself." The guard snarled. The crowd surged forward, but Zakariyā recovered his balance and again raised his hands for calm. "Violence reveals the weakness of your position, not its strength," he said, addressing not just his attacker, but all present. "If my words cannot be answered with words, perhaps they contain more truth than you wish to acknowledge." The simple logic of this statement registered on many faces, including some of the other guards who shifted uncomfortably. Seeing the situation slipping from his control, Haman signaled to the captain, who produced a formal arrest document bearing the high priest's seal. Enough debate. "You will come with us now to answer before the proper authorities." The crowd's mood darkened dangerously. Some began picking up stones. Others moved to position themselves between Zakariyā and the guards. The situation balanced on a knife's edge between tense standoff and violent confrontation. "My friends," Zakariyā addressed his supporters, "remember that our path is one of peace, not violence. Throughout history, prophets have faced opposition from those whose power depends on controlling access to divine truth. What happens to me matters less than how you preserve what you have learned." He turned to the guards. "I will come willingly. There is no need for further confrontation." A woman called out from the crowd, "Teacher, they will not give you justice." Zakariyā's smile was gentle, but held immeasurable depth. Justice comes in many forms, not all immediately visible to human eyes. As the guards moved to surround him, Zakariyā bent down and picked up the 2 pieces of his broken staff. He handed them to a young man at the edge of the crowd, one of his devoted students. "Keep these," he said quietly. "What appears broken may yet serve a purpose we cannot now see." The crowd parted reluctantly, creating a path through which the guards led Zakariyā away from the pulpit where he had delivered his final public teaching. Many wept openly. Others stood in stunned silence. But a few, those who had recognized the coded messages in his sermon, exchanged knowing glances, already preparing to fulfill the contingency plans their teacher had long ago established for this very day. The ceremonial chains hung heavily from Zakariyā's wrists, their symbolic weight far exceeding their physical burden. These were no ordinary restraints, but the sacred bonds reserved for religious transgressors, prophets, priests, and holy men accused of the gravest spiritual offenses. Their very use signaled the severity of the charges he faced. The tribunal chamber had been hastily prepared in the hours following his arrest. Oil lamps cast flickering shadows across the stone walls as 23 members of the Sanhedrin, a reduced quorum convened for speed rather than thorough deliberation, took their positions on elevated seats, arranged in a semicircle. At the center sat the high priest, his elaborate vestments incongruous with the late hour. This emergency session is convened to address dangerous teachings that threaten the spiritual welfare of our people. The high priest began, his voice carrying the practiced resonance of one accustomed to ceremonial pronouncements. Zakariyā stood calmly, his aged frame appearing fragile, yet somehow undiminished by the chains or the circumstances. The guards had positioned him so that the harsh lamplight fell directly on his face, a common tactic to discomfort the accused and make their reactions more visible to the judges. "Witnesses, come forward," called the court officer. The first witness approached, a merchant known to have business dealings with several council members. "I heard the accused claim that the temple would be rendered unnecessary by one who is to come. He said, 'Worship will not be confined to buildings made by human hands.'" Zakariyā remained silent, his expression unchanged. A second witness stepped forward, a scribe who had recorded Zakariyā's teachings that very morning. He spoke of a voice crying in the wilderness who would prepare the way for another, one he claimed would transform our understanding of the law. This clearly undermines the authority of the council as the rightful interpreters of sacred tradition. A third witness, a junior priest with ambitions well known among the temple hierarchy, added, "He has repeatedly taught that direct communion with God requires no priestly intermediary, a teaching that would render our sacred office meaningless if widely embraced." Throughout these testimonies, Zakariyā maintained his silence, neither confirming nor denying the accusations. This seemed to unsettle some council members who had expected either vehement denial or impassioned defense. "Does the accused offer no response to these serious charges?" the high priest finally demanded. Zakariyā raised his head, meeting the high priest's gaze directly. When words are twisted from their context, responding to the distortion only lends it legitimacy. The witnesses have spoken partial truths, severed from their intended meaning. A murmur ran through the council chamber. "If you claim to be misrepresented," pressed an elder council member, "then speak plainly now. Do you or do you not prophesy the coming of one who will upend our established interpretations of the law? I speak of fulfillment, not destruction, Zakariyā replied, his voice gaining strength. The law, given through Moses, was always meant to guide hearts toward justice, mercy, and right relationship with God and neighbor. If your interpretations have obscured these purposes beneath layers of human addition, then yes, a return to divine intent may indeed require upending certain established practices. The high priest rose to his feet, his face flushing with anger. You speak as though divine authority has passed from this council to you alone. Not to me, Zakariyā answered calmly. I am merely a voice, one among many throughout our history, calling the faithful back to the essence of what God requires. The prophets before me faced similar resistance when they prioritized justice and mercy over elaborate ritual divorced from ethical living. He equates himself with the prophets, exclaimed one council member. Worse, added another, he implies we have perverted the law rather than preserved it. The high priest raised his hands for silence. When the chamber quieted, he approached Zakariyā directly. Standing so close that the accused could feel his breath. I charge you by the living God, he intoned formally. Tell us plainly, do you claim that the one to come, this prophet you speak of, will have authority greater than the temple itself? Zakariyā met his gaze unflinchingly. You have said it. Moreover, I tell you that you will see the fulfillment of all the prophets have spoken, though many of you will fail to recognize divine visitation when it comes. The high priest stepped back, his face contorted with what appeared to be righteous indignation. With a theatrical gesture, he grasped the front of his robe and tore it from neck to waist, the traditional response to hearing blasphemy. What further need have we of witnesses? He cried. You have heard his blasphemy with your own ears. What is your judgment? Guilty, came the immediate response from Haman and his closest allies. Others followed more hesitantly until a clear majority had condemned the elderly prophet. A few remained silent, their troubled expressions suggesting private doubts about the proceedings. But none voiced open opposition to the verdict. The council finds you guilty of blasphemy, false prophecy, and incitement against established religious authority, the high priest declared. The traditional penalty for such offenses is death. However, as we serve under Roman law, this sentence requires the governor's approval. Zakariyā received the verdict with the same calm dignity that had characterized his entire defense. As the guards moved to lead him away, his gaze swept across the council members, not with anger or accusation, but with something that unsettled them far more, compassion, as if he understood and forgave their failure to recognize truth when it stood before them in chains. The ancient tree stood solitary in the small grove beyond the eastern gate of Jerusalem, its massive trunk twisted by centuries of growth. Lightning had struck it decades ago, hollowing out its core while leaving the outer wood alive, a living sanctuary that had sheltered travelers, hermits, and wild creatures throughout its long existence. It was toward this tree that Zakariyā fled in the pre-dawn darkness, having escaped his captors through circumstances that seemed more divine intervention than human planning. A sympathetic guard, troubled by the hasty proceedings and unjust verdict, had deliberately left his cell door unlatched and created a diversion that allowed the elderly prophet to slip away. I cannot openly oppose the council, the guard had whispered, but neither can I participate in the murder of a holy man. May God guide your steps. Those steps, guided indeed by something beyond mere chance, had led Zakariyā through the sleeping city and out its eastern gate, just as the horizon began to lighten with the first suggestion of dawn. His aged body, fortified by a lifetime of simple living and regular fasting, carried him swiftly across the Kidron Valley toward the grove of ancient trees where he had often sought solitude for prayer. Reaching the hollow tree, Zakariyā paused to listen for sounds of pursuit. Hearing nothing yet, he slipped into the spacious cavity within the trunk. finding the familiar interior now illuminated by thin shafts of early morning light penetrating through cracks in the ancient wood. Inside, he sank to his knees in prayer, knowing that temporary escape did not mean ultimate deliverance. His visions had shown him enough to understand that martyrdom awaited him. The question was not whether, but when and how. Still, he prayed not for personal safety, but for strength to complete his prophetic mission with dignity and for protection of the truth he had spent a lifetime teaching. The sun had fully risen when Zakariyā's prayers were interrupted by distant shouts. Temple guards had discovered his escape and organized search parties. Dogs barked, their keen senses employed to track the fugitive prophet through the streets and beyond the city walls. From within his sanctuary, Zakariyā could see through a narrow split in the wood as mounted soldiers entered the grove, their weapons glinting in the morning light. Their captain, a man known for brutal efficiency, directed the search with cold precision. "The old man cannot have gone far," the captain declared. "Search every cave, every ravine, every hollow where a fugitive might hide." For hours, the search continued around him, somehow missing the most obvious hiding place, as though the ancient tree temporarily blinded those who looked directly at it. Zakariyā remained perfectly still, conserving his strength and continuing his prayers in silence. By midday, the searchers' frustration had peaked. The dogs, oddly, refused to approach the hollow tree, whining and pulling in other directions when handlers tried to lead them near. This behavior, which should have aroused suspicion, instead angered the captain, who kicked one of the animals for its seeming failure. "We've wasted enough time in this grove," he finally announced. "Divide the men, half continue toward Bethany, the others circle back toward the Jordan Road." As the search parties regrouped and prepared to move on, a young soldier paused to drink from his water skin in the shade of the hollow tree. Leaning against the trunk, he felt an unusual warmth radiating from the wood, a warmth that did not match the cool morning. Curious, he examined the tree more closely and discovered the opening partially concealed by hanging vines. "Captain," he called, "there's something here!" The moment of discovery brought no fear to Zakariyā. Instead, a profound calm settled over him as he heard the soldiers rush toward the tree. The time for hiding had passed. The time for witness had come. "There he is!" The captain's voice held triumphant cruelty as he peered into the hollow trunk. "Come out, old man, or we'll drag you out." Zakariyā emerged with quiet dignity, his face showing neither fear nor defiance, but a serene acceptance that momentarily unsettled his captors. "You've led us on quite a chase, prophet," the captain sneered, recovering his composure. "The council will not be pleased by this delay in justice." "True justice cannot be delayed by human actions," Zakariyā replied calmly. "It arrives in its appointed time, whether in this world or the next." The captain's face darkened. "We'll see what justice awaits you." He turned to his men. "Bind him." No chances of another escape. As the soldiers moved to seize him, one hesitated, recognition dawning in his eyes. "This is the teacher who healed my daughter when the physicians had given up hope. And now he's a condemned blasphemer," the captain snapped. "Carry out your orders or join him in punishment." As rough hands bound Zakariyā's wrists, he noticed the captain studying the hollow tree with calculating eyes. "This tree has sheltered a traitor," the captain declared, "and now it will participate in his punishment." He turned to his men with a cruel smile. "Bring the saw." A cold dread passed through the assembled soldiers as they realized the captain's intention. Even those who had been eager in the pursuit now exchanged uncertain glances. "You would saw through the tree with him inside?" one soldier asked, his voice betraying his horror. "The high priest wants an example that none will forget," the captain replied. "This punishment befits one who has undermined the very foundations of our faith." "Fetch the saw, now!" The small crystal vial caught the first tear as it fell from the eye of a woman hidden among the distant olive trees. She had been one of Zakariyā's devoted followers for decades, and now she watched in horror as the guards positioned the massive saw against the ancient tree where her beloved teacher was. Imprisoned, the metal teeth bit into the living wood with a sound that seemed to tear the very fabric of the morning. Zakariyā, bound within the hollow trunk, closed his eyes not in fear, but in a final surrender to divine will. As the physical pain began, a sensation beyond description, as the saw inched closer to his flesh, something extraordinary happened in the realm of his inner experience. The agony did not diminish, but alongside it arose a presence of immeasurable compassion. Where there should have been only suffering, there came also a profound awareness of being held in divine embrace. Each serration of the saw's teeth corresponded with a pulsing wave of light behind his closed eyelids, light that gradually formed into recognizable shapes. "I am with you, beloved servant," came a voice unlike any human sound, felt rather than heard at the core of his being. "As you have remained faithful to me, so I remain faithful to you in this hour of trial." The physical torture continued as the saw cut through the tree and into his body. But Zakariyā found himself simultaneously experiencing another reality. In this parallel awareness, he stood in a vast space filled with radiant beings, messengers he recognized from previous visions, but now saw with unprecedented clarity. "Your suffering is not unseen," one radiant figure assured him. "What appears as defeat in the physical realm resonates as triumph in realms beyond mortal understanding." Through this transcendent experience, Zakariyā maintained an awareness of his physical circumstances. As the saw continued its grisly work, he found his lips moving in prayer, not pleas for deliverance, but expressions of forgiveness for those who tortured him. "They do not understand what they do," he whispered, blood flecking his lips. "May their hearts be opened to truth, even through this act of darkness." Some of the soldiers, hearing these words, turned away in shame. Others hardened their hearts further, increasing the speed of their terrible labor to silence the voice that penetrated their carefully constructed barriers. The captain, unsettled by Zakariyā's preternatural calm, shouted, "Faster! Complete the task quickly." Yet as the blade progressed, something inexplicable occurred that was visible to all present. A subtle luminescence began to emanate from the tree itself, growing stronger as Zakariyā's physical strength waned. The prophet's face, visible through the widening cut in the trunk, showed neither agony nor fear, but an expression of profound peace, even wonder, hidden among the distant trees. Zakariyā's followers, who had secretly gathered, watched in mingled horror and awe. They saw what the soldiers either could not or would not acknowledge, a corona of light surrounding the tree, growing more intense with each passing moment. Some fell to their knees in prayer. Others wept silently, collecting their tears in small vials as sacred relics of this holy martyrdom. "Look at his face," whispered one follower to another. "It shines like Moses did when he descended the mountain." Indeed, despite the grotesque torture being inflicted upon him, Zakariyā's countenance radiated a luminosity that seemed to come from within. His eyes, when briefly opened, held not the glazed look of one overwhelmed by pain, but the clear gaze of one perceiving wonders beyond mortal sight. In his expanding awareness, Zakariyā was being shown visions of the future, his son Yahya baptizing in the Jordan, the miraculous birth to Maryam, the ministry of Isa bringing healing to the broken. He saw how his own suffering and death formed one thread in a vast tapestry of divine purpose, unfolding across generations. "Your blood waters seeds that will flower in times you cannot now imagine," the divine presence assured him. "What seems an ending is but a threshold crossed." As his physical life ebbed, Zakariyā experienced an expansion rather than a diminishment of being. The boundaries that had separated him from direct communion with the divine dissolved. Knowledge flowed into him, mysteries of creation, patterns connecting all living things. purposes behind suffering that had remained hidden throughout his earthly life. Some of this transcendent understanding found expression in his final audible words, which emerged with surprising strength given his physical condition. Those closest to the tree heard fragments of prophecy, blessing, and revelation that they would later struggle to articulate but would never forget. "The veil thins," he said at one point. "What we perceive as separate worlds are but different chambers in the same dwelling." And later, death is not extinction but transformation. The flame does not die. It returns to the greater light from which all lesser lights are borrowed. Even the most hardened among the soldiers fell silent as these words echoed in the suddenly still grove. For a moment, the saw stopped its movement, its operators frozen not by command, but by an overwhelming sense of standing on holy ground despite the horror of their actions. In that suspended moment, a sudden wind swept through the grove, causing the branches of all the trees to sway in what witnesses would later describe as a coordinated bowing motion, as though nature itself paid homage to the prophet in his final moments of earthly life. The soil beneath the tree darkened as Zakariyā's blood soaked into the earth. This ground, witnesses would later say, remained strangely fertile for generations afterward, plants growing there with unusual vigor, their blooms more vivid, their fruits sweeter than those in surrounding areas. Some would collect small portions of this soil in linen pouches, keeping them as sacred relics that were said to heal ailments when applied with prayer and faith. Despite his grievous wounds as the saw continued its terrible work, Zakariyā maintained consciousness far beyond what seemed humanly possible. More extraordinary still was his ability to speak, not in the expected cries of agony, but in clear, measured teachings that those nearby could not help but hear. "Remember," he said, his voice somehow carrying over the harsh sounds of the saw, "that prophecy does not end with my death, but continues in those who maintain fidelity to divine truth. My son Yahya comes after me, bearing a message of preparation. Listen for his voice in the wilderness." The captain, unsettled by this unnatural composure, ordered his men to work faster. Yet even as they obeyed, they could not avoid hearing the prophet's words. "The signs of the true messenger are these," Zakariyā continued, pausing only during the most intense waves of pain. "First, he asks no payment for spiritual guidance. Second, his life embodies the principles he teaches. Third, he speaks truth that resonates with the inner light God has placed in every human heart, even when that truth challenges prevailing powers." A younger soldier whispered to his companion, "How can he teach while dying? It defies nature." "Much about this man has always defied nature," came the whispered reply. Zakariyā's teachings grew more specific as his physical strength waned. To those with ears attuned to prophetic nuance, he was clearly describing future events, particularly regarding his son Yahya and the promised Messiah whose way Yahya would prepare. "When you hear of one baptizing in the Jordan, calling people to repentance and renewal, know that the time draws near. After him comes one greater still, one whose sandal neither Yahya nor I am worthy to untie." Between these prophetic utterances came practical guidance for his scattered followers, instructions for preserving teachings, maintaining their community amid growing persecution, and recognizing genuine spiritual authority in chaotic times ahead. "Gather in homes rather than public spaces," he advised. "Share meals that nourish both body and spirit. Pass teachings through direct transmission from teacher to student, rather than written texts that might be destroyed or misinterpreted." Even as blood flowed freely from his wounds, Zakariyā found strength to offer blessings to all present, including, remarkably, those who tortured him. "To my followers who witness this moment," he said, his voice growing softer yet somehow remaining audible, "accept what happens, not with hatred, but with understanding that prophets throughout time have faced similar ends. Your task is not vengeance, but preservation of the light." Then, addressing his executioners, "And to you who carry out this sentence, I offer no condemnation. May the one who sees all hearts grant you recognition of the truth you now oppose, and may that recognition lead to transformation rather than despair." Several soldiers visibly flinched at these words. One quietly stepped away from the grim work, unable to continue. Others hardened their expressions, as if creating a shield against compassion that might unsettle their certainty. As the saw neared the center of his body, Zakariyā spoke of his son's coming mission with particular clarity and urgency. "Yahya will face powers similar to those I now confront. His message of moral renewal will threaten those whose authority depends on compromise with corrupt systems. When he speaks against impurity in high places, it will cost him dearly. But his voice, like mine, cannot be truly silenced by physical destruction." These words were overheard by a merchant passing on the nearby road, who would later carry them to Yahya in the wilderness, confirmation of the path the young prophet had already begun to walk. In his final moments of earthly consciousness, Zakariyā offered a teaching so profound that those who heard it would spend lifetimes contemplating its layers of meaning. The apparent victory of darkness over light is always temporary. What seems to be extinguished continues to burn in a realm beyond sight. Death transfigures but does not end the prophet's mission. Listen now with your outer ears. Soon you will need to listen with the ear of your heart. As life ebbed from his broken body, Zakariyā's face reflected not agony, but a transcendent peace, even a subtle joy, as though he glimpsed a reality closed to ordinary perception. His final audible words were not in the common language, but in an ancient sacred tongue, understood by few. Those words, carefully memorized and passed down by witnesses, would later be recognized as a prophecy fulfilled in the lives of Yahya, Maryam and Isa. The soil that received his blood that day would be quietly gathered by followers after the soldiers departed. Sacred, earth that connected the physical world with the prophetic legacy that would continue to unfold long after Zakariyā's earthly voice fell silent. The prophet's cloak, once a simple garment of undyed wool, now bore the crimson stains of sacrifice. As Zakariyā's life force ebbed away, this humble robe became saturated with the evidence of his martyrdom, each drop of blood a testament to unwavering faith, maintained unto death. The final moments approached, with a strange mixture of horror and transcendence. The saw had nearly completed its grisly work, the ancient tree groaning as if sharing in the prophet's agony. Yet Zakariyā's face reflected not the expected torment, but a luminous serenity that unsettled even the most hardened among his executioners. "His eyes," whispered one soldier to another, "they don't look at us or through us. They look beyond." Indeed, Zakariyā's gaze had fixed on something invisible to those around him. The physical pain, though undeniably present, had receded in importance as his consciousness expanded beyond bodily limitations. What his executioners could not perceive was the gathering of luminous presences surrounding the tree. Messengers from beyond the veil, witnesses to his transition, escorts for his imminent journey. The captain, disturbed by the prophet's supernatural composure, barked orders for greater speed. "Finish it! The sun will set soon." But as the saw made its final approach to Zakariyā's heart, nature itself seemed to respond. Though the day had been clear, clouds gathered with unnatural swiftness, darkening the sky to a premature twilight. A wind arose, not the gentle breeze common to Jerusalem's afternoons, but a forceful gust that bent the surrounding trees and raised dust devils that spun around the execution site. "What sorcery is this?" demanded the captain, his voice betraying the first hints of fear. "Not sorcery," Zakariyā managed to say, his words barely audible now. "The elements themselves bear witness. As it was for prophets before me, so it is now." The reference to earlier prophets, many of whom tradition held had been accompanied by natural phenomena at their deaths, sent a visible shudder through some of the guards. One dropped his portion of the saw and stepped back, making a sign against evil. "Finish the task." The captain shouted, his composure cracking further. In that moment, a sound like distant thunder rolled across the sky, though no lightning was visible. The ground beneath the tree trembled slightly, not enough to be called an earthquake, but sufficient to suggest the earth itself registered protest. Among the hidden witnesses watching from a distance, one young disciple clutched his companion's arm. "The veil thins," he whispered. "What the teacher always said, that the spiritual and physical realms are separated by the thinnest of barriers. I can almost see it now." Others, among the concealed followers, reported similar experiences, fleeting glimpses of radiant beings gathering around the tree. Momentary perceptions of music unlike any earthly composition. Brief scents of flowers that couldn't possibly bloom in that season or region. At the tree, the saw completed its terrible purpose. The moment of Zakariyā's physical death arrived not with a cry of pain, but with words of forgiveness and promise. It is accomplished. What seems to end here continues elsewhere. Remember? His head bowed, and the light that had so strangely illumined his face throughout the ordeal seemed to intensify briefly before gradually fading. The body that had housed his spirit for nearly a century slumped within the severed tree, blood still flowing into the receptive earth below. An uncanny silence fell over the execution site. Even the captain, who had driven the cruel process forward, stood momentarily frozen, as if uncertain what should follow such a death. The supernatural manifestations, the sudden clouds, the unusual wind, the earth's tremor, began to subside, though the air retained a charged quality that everyone present could feel, but none could explain. It was a young guard, one who had shown reluctance throughout the execution, who finally broke protocol. Stepping forward, he carefully removed the blood-stained cloak from Zakariyā's body, folding it with unexpected reverence. "What are you doing?" the captain demanded, recovering his authoritarian bearing. "Even the condemned deserve burial dignity," the young guard replied, his voice steady despite his superior's glare. "Unless you object, I will ensure this garment is given to his family." The captain hesitated, then gave a curt nod, perhaps eager now to complete the task and distance himself from the unsettling sight. "Do what you will with it. Our orders were for execution, not disposal." As the soldiers began the grim process of removing Zakariyā's body from the tree's remains, those watching from hiding noted something remarkable. The faces of several guards showed unmistakable signs of inner conflict, even distress. Seeds of doubt had been planted in unexpected soil. The young guard who had claimed the blood-stained cloak did not in fact return it to any family member. Instead, he carefully made his way to a predetermined meeting point where one of Zakariyā's closest disciples waited. The exchange was brief, conducted in whispers. "He died as he lived," the guard said, handing over the precious relic, "with dignity beyond understanding and peace that made no earthly sense." "And you?" asked the disciple, noticing the guard's troubled expression. "I am no longer certain of anything I once believed," came the reply, "except that I witnessed something holy today, even in the midst of something terrible." As night fell fully over Jerusalem, small groups of the faithful gathered in secret locations throughout the city, sharing news of their teacher's martyrdom, not with despair, but with a complex mixture of grief and wonder. Something had ended, yes, but in that ending something new and powerful had just begun. The secret gospel lay hidden beneath a loose stone in the floor of a modest home in the outskirts of Jerusalem. Written on parchment in a careful hand, these accounts of Zakariyā's final teachings had been hurriedly transcribed by disciples in the days following his martyrdom, before memories could fade or details be lost. Unlike official temple texts, this document captured the prophet's most revolutionary insights, those deemed too dangerous to preserve openly in a time of growing persecution. 3 days after Zakariyā's death, as evening shadows lengthened across Jerusalem, his followers gathered in small groups throughout the city. They met in private homes, closed workshops, and secluded gardens, never more than 12 in any location to avoid drawing attention. The official story circulating through the markets claimed the elderly teacher had been executed for blasphemy after a fair trial, his body disposed of without ceremony, as befitted a heretic. Those who knew the truth shared it in whispers, passing accounts of the supernatural events that had accompanied his martyrdom. The sudden darkness, the earth's trembling, the inexplicable wind. Most compelling were reports of Zakariyā's extraordinary composure and the luminous quality that had suffused his face even as the saw completed its grisly work. In one gathering, hidden in the back room of a pottery workshop, 12 men and women sat in a tight circle around 3 small oil lamps. Among them was Eli, once a temple scribe who had secretly recorded Zakariyā's teachings for years. "The authorities believe they have extinguished his voice," Eli said, unrolling a fresh parchment. "Our task now is to ensure his words continue to illuminate the path for those who come after us." Through the night, they worked in shifts, some writing as others dictated from memory, still others standing watch at windows and doors. By dawn, they had produced 3 identical copies of Zakariyā's core teachings, each to be entrusted to a different keeper and carried in different directions. Similar scenes played out across the city as Zakariyā's fragmented community worked to preserve both his public teachings and his more esoteric instructions, those shared only with his closest circle. These secret gospels would become the foundation of an underground movement that would eventually connect with the ministries of Yahya and later Isa, forming an unbroken chain of spiritual transmission. Meanwhile, Yahya had received news of his father's martyrdom while baptizing followers in the Jordan River. Those present described how the young prophet had stood motionless in the flowing water, his face registering not surprise but solemn confirmation. "It is as he foretold," Yahya finally said, "and as I too have seen in visions. The path of truth often leads through the valley of persecution, rather than return to Jerusalem for any formal mourning." Yahya intensified his own mission, his voice taking on a new urgency as he called people to spiritual renewal. "Prepare the way," he proclaimed with even greater conviction. "The time grows shorter. After me comes one, whose sandal I am not worthy to untie." Those who had known both father and son remarked on the spiritual mantle that had visibly passed from Zakariyā to Yahya, not merely through heredity but through divine appointment. The younger prophet spoke with an authority that silenced scoffers and drew even skeptics to the Jordan's banks to hear his uncompromising message. In Jerusalem, the temple authorities moved quickly to erase Zakariyā's legacy. His name was struck from official records. His teachings were declared heretical. Those known to have studied with him were barred from temple precincts. Haman personally supervised the destruction of any writings associated with the executed prophet that could be found in public collections. Yet these efforts to obliterate Zakariyā's influence achieved the opposite effect. His martyrdom transformed him from a respected teacher to a figure of spiritual legend. Stories of his wisdom, compassion, and supernatural insight spread beyond Jerusalem to surrounding regions. People who had never heard him speak in life now claimed spiritual connection to his teachings. Most significant was the impact on those who had witnessed his death. The young guard who had preserved the blood-stained cloak eventually left military service to join Yahya's growing movement. Several others among the execution party reported troubling dreams in which Zakariyā appeared, not in accusation, but offering forgiveness that proved more unsettling than condemnation. 1 month after the martyrdom, the first accounts of healing miracles began to circulate. Pilgrims visiting the site of the hollow tree reporting relief from chronic ailments. Visions of consolation, inexplicable peace descending in moments of prayer. Though temple authorities attempted to restrict access to the location, people continued to visit surreptitiously, collecting small portions of the soil or splinters from the remaining tree as relics. The dispersed community of followers, rather than disintegrating as the authorities had expected, grew more cohesive in their shared devotion to preserving Zakariyā's legacy. Meeting now in private homes rather than public spaces, they developed recognition signals, coded language, and secret symbols that allowed them to identify fellow believers without exposing themselves to informants. "We are not the end, but the beginning," Eli often reminded those who gathered to study the secret gospel. What appears to be defeat in worldly terms is merely preparation for a greater victory that will unfold in ways we cannot yet imagine. As spring turned to summer, these scattered seeds of Zakariyā's spiritual lineage took root. Throughout the region, an underground network of devotion that would eventually flow into the mighty river of transformation his visions had foretold. The lamp of Zakariyā burned with a steady flame that never seemed to consume its oil. Placed in a small alcove within the hidden shrine established by his followers, this simple clay vessel had been lit during the first memorial gathering 40 days after the prophet's martyrdom. Tended by successive generations of devotees, the lamp became a symbol of enduring spiritual illumination, a physical manifestation of Zakariyā's teaching that divine light cannot be extinguished by human opposition. 5 years had passed since the brutal execution at the hollow tree. What temple authorities had intended as a decisive end to Zakariyā's influence had instead become the catalyst for a spiritual movement that now extended far beyond Jerusalem's walls. The prophet's martyrdom, rather than silencing his message, had amplified it, transforming his teachings from local wisdom to regional legend. In the countryside near the Jordan River, Yahya's ministry had grown from a handful of seekers to a movement that troubled both religious and political powers. His call to repentance and spiritual renewal drew thousands, including many who had never known his father but recognized in the son the same uncompromising commitment to divine truth. "My father prepared the path that I now walk," Yahya told his closest disciples one evening as they rested after a day of baptizing followers. "And I prepare the way for one greater still, whose coming fulfills what prophets have long foretold." These words echoed Zakariyā's final teachings, the continuation of a prophetic lineage that stretched back through generations and forward toward a culmination still unfolding. As Yahya spoke, several listeners recalled how the elderly prophet had foreseen not only his own martyrdom, but his son's future role and the eventual coming of Isa. Meanwhile, in Jerusalem, the community of Zakariyā's followers had not diminished but grown stronger in adversity. Moving their gatherings from public spaces to private homes had not restricted their influence, but had instead created more intimate settings for deeper spiritual formation. The necessity of secrecy had fostered bonds of trust and mutual support that casual association could never have produced. Eli, once a temple scribe and now keeper of one copy of the secret gospel, had established a network of trusted messengers who carried Zakariyā's teachings to communities throughout Judea, Samaria, and beyond. These teachings, combined with accounts of the prophet's extraordinary life and death, inspired similar gatherings in distant villages and towns. "What began as persecution has become propagation," Eli observed to fellow keepers of the tradition. They sought to confine the prophet's voice to Jerusalem, then to silence it entirely. Instead, it now echoes in places he never visited in life. Most remarkable was how Zakariyā's martyrdom had affected even those who had opposed him. Several former temple officials, troubled by their complicity in his execution and the supernatural events that accompanied it, had quietly distanced themselves from the religious establishment. A few had even made discreet contact with the prophet's followers, seeking understanding of teachings they had once condemned. Haman alone remained implacably hostile, ascending to greater authority within the temple hierarchy and continuing his campaign to eradicate all traces of Zakariyā's influence. Yet his very determination highlighted the failure of the execution to achieve its purpose. One does not wage war against a truly vanquished enemy. The connection between Zakariyā's legacy and the developing story of Maryam became increasingly apparent as years passed. Now a young woman of exceptional piety, she lived in seclusion, still under the protection of arrangements Zakariyā had made before his death. Those few permitted to visit her reported experiences reminiscent of the miraculous provisions once found in her chamber under Zakariyā's guardianship, unseasonable fruits, inexplicable fragrances, a quality of peace that transcended ordinary atmosphere. When news came of Maryam's unexpected pregnancy, Zakariyā's most devoted followers recognized the fulfillment of his prophecies. While others responded with scandal and accusation, this inner circle prepared for the birth that would connect directly to their martyred teacher's final visions. The prophet showed us this moment would come. Eli reminded those who gathered at the hidden shrine. What appears impossible by human understanding unfolds according to divine purpose. The lamp burned steadily as they prayed, its unwavering flame reflecting in their eyes. Outside, Jerusalem continued its ordinary rhythms, largely unaware of the transformative currents flowing beneath the surface of daily life. Political powers rose and fell. Religious authorities debated interpretations of ancient texts. Merchants traded and farmers tended fields, all while a new chapter in divine human relationship was being quietly prepared. Pilgrimage to the site of Zakariyā's martyrdom had become an established practice among the faithful, though conducted with discretion to avoid official notice. The hollow tree itself had been largely destroyed during the execution, but new growth had sprung from its roots, a living metaphor embraced by those who understood that death often precedes more abundant life. The shrine, with its ever-burning lamp, stood some distance from this public site, its location known only to the most trusted adherents. Here, gathered around the symbolic light, successive generations would continue to pass the prophet's wisdom from heart to heart, preserving a lineage of spiritual insight that would eventually flow into the greater river of revelation brought by the child whose coming Zakariyā had foreseen in his final visions. The sacred verses glowed on the illuminated page, the Arabic script flowing with divine elegance. Here, preserved for all time in the final revelation, the story of Zakariyā found its permanent home, no longer dependent on secret gospels or hidden traditions, but established in scripture that would reach every corner of the world. What had begun as one prophet's lonely stand against corruption had become an essential thread in the tapestry of faith that would guide countless generations. Mention of the mercy of your Lord to his servant Zakariyā, began the passage, continuing to recount his prayer for a son despite advanced age, the miraculous birth of Yahya, and the steadfast devotion that characterized his life and mission. 14 centuries had passed since the martyrdom at the hollow tree. Empires had risen and fallen. Jerusalem had changed hands countless times. The temple where Zakariyā once taught had been destroyed and never rebuilt. Yet his story endured, not as mere history, but as living guidance, a testament to faith maintained through the most severe trials. In a simple mosque in a village far from Jerusalem, an imam recited these verses during evening prayers. Among the worshippers was an elderly man who listened with particular attention, his weathered face reflecting the special resonance these words held for him. His name, too, was Zakariyā, given in honor of the prophet whose story had guided his own life's path. The prophet Zakariyā shows us that age is no barrier to divine blessing, the imam commented after the recitation. When all seemed impossible by human reckoning, God's power manifested in ways that transcended natural limitations. As the congregation dispersed into the cool evening air, the elderly Zakariyā remained seated on his prayer mat, reflecting on how the ancient prophet's experiences paralleled challenges in every believer's spiritual journey. The opposition Zakariyā faced from religious authorities mirrored the resistance of ego to spiritual transformation. His persistent prayer, despite apparent impossibility, illustrated the essence of faith, trust beyond visible evidence. His martyrdom demonstrated that apparent defeat often precedes the greatest victories in the realm of eternal significance. Throughout the Muslim world, from Morocco to Indonesia, similar scenes unfolded daily. Zakariyā's story recited, contemplated, and integrated into the spiritual understanding of diverse communities. His name was given to countless children, his example cited in sermons addressing perseverance in adversity, and his prayer for a son in old age, repeated by those facing their own seemingly impossible circumstances. But the Prophet's influence extended beyond any single religious tradition. In Christian teachings, Zakariyā appeared as Zechariah, father of John the Baptist, his story intertwining with the nativity narrative that formed Christianity's foundation. Jewish tradition honored him among the latter prophets whose warnings had gone unheeded before Jerusalem's destruction. This convergence across traditions fulfilled another aspect of Zakariyā's legacy, his vision of truth transcending sectarian boundaries, of divine light recognizable to all with eyes to see, regardless of formal religious affiliation. In modern Jerusalem, archaeologists occasionally unearthed artifacts connected to the ancient prophet, oil lamps bearing symbols associated with his teachings, fragments of texts describing his wisdom, structural remains possibly linked to locations where he taught. Such discoveries sparked renewed interest in the historical figure behind the scriptural accounts, though the physical evidence could never capture the spiritual essence that gave his story enduring significance. More meaningful than these material traces were the living echoes of his witness, found wherever people maintained faith despite opposition, spoke truth regardless of personal cost, or recognized divine presence in seemingly ordinary circumstances. In prisons where believers faced persecution, Zakariyā's steadfastness provided a model of dignity under duress. In hospitals where families prayed for impossible healings, his story offered hope beyond medical prognosis. In communities threatened by sectarian violence, his inclusive vision suggested paths toward reconciliation. The elderly Zakariyā in the village mosque finally rose from his prayer mat, his joints stiff with age, but his spirit lightened by communion with his namesake across the centuries. As he walked home through narrow streets, he passed children playing in the last light of day, one boy proudly showing friends how he had mended a broken toy. "See, it was broken completely, but now it works again," the child explained with the simple faith of the young. The old man smiled, recognizing in this small moment an echo of the Prophet's final teachings. What appears broken may serve purposes yet unseen. Apparent endings often become thresholds to new beginnings. Divine wisdom operates on timescales that transcend human understanding. Under a darkening sky, scattered with emerging stars, the elderly Zakariyā offered a silent prayer of gratitude for the ancient prophet whose example had illuminated his path through life's complexities. The prayer completed a circle of connection, from the prophet who had once raised his hands in the temple sanctuary, through centuries of believers who had preserved and lived his teachings, to this moment of quiet appreciation in a world the ancient prophet could never have imagined, but had helped to shape through his unwavering fidelity to divine truth. In homes, mosques, churches, and synagogues across the globe, the eternal echo of Zakariyā's witness continued to resonate. A reminder that prophecy's ultimate purpose is not predicting the future, but revealing timeless truths that guide humanity toward its highest potential. His story, preserved in scripture and embodied in lives of faith, remained a lamp that no persecution could extinguish, a light passing from generation to generation, illuminating the path toward divine presence in every age.